Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sharon Capetta, and I'm here at the Community Foundation and delighted to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon. Some housekeeping matters you can see on the screen. Please use, this is a panel format, so please use the Q&A function for your questions. We do have a dedicated section of the program for your questions. And if for any reason you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat function and that will be monitored as well. Without further ado, I want to share our colleagues, the three organizations that routinely put these programs on. And you're going to see Sharon Closius, the president of the Valley Foundation, and Lisa Stanger, the executive director of the Jewish Foundation for Greater New Haven, later in the program. And they'll have some comments for you. But what I would like to do is introduce you to our incredible speaker today. I have heard Erinn share her knowledge and enthusiasm for this research and the data behind it. And I'm confident that you're going to not only learn something, but you're going to very quickly come to feel as though you have taken a master class. Erinn is the president of Advisors in Philanthropy, which is a national organization of advisors in philanthropy. And she's also the founder of a company called GiveTeam. And for the nonprofit organizations on our program today, she'll have a little information for you that will be very helpful. And Erinn is also a self-described data geek. So I think that you're going to enjoy this program, and I look forward to hearing more from you after. So Erinn, would take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you all for having me today. I'm really glad to join you. Let me share my screen and we will jump into all the data and fun. Um, so, um, all right. So thank you so much for that introduction, Sharon. I'm really happy to be with you all today. Just by way of additional background, to give you a sense of some of my professional background. Before I started GiveTeam, I ran a research lab at Stanford University focused on effective philanthropy. So there I was really looking at donor behavior, what works, what doesn't work, and financial advisors and trying to understand how they supported their clients around charitable giving and where there might have been gaps in their knowledge and support. Before that, I ran GuideStar, also known as Candid now, GuideStar's nonprofit strategy. And while I was there, developed the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum levels of distinction that organizations can receive. I love connecting with professionals. The QR code is a link to connect with me on LinkedIn. And as Sharon said, I'm also thrilled to be the current president of the board of Advisors in Philanthropy. Let me tell you a little bit about GiveTeam so you can see where my orientation comes from, and then we're going to go deep into data. One of my favorite things is to use data to understand trends and then apply them in practice. So to me, data is only useful if we can come up with practical applications. And so that's what I really want to impart on you today. Sprinkle lots of data and information and really think through with you what this means for you and your practice and your work. So, one of the things I found when I was working at Stanford before I started GiveTeam was the vast majority of philanthropic resources were targeting donors in the top 1%. And so I talk about segmentation in this talk in a couple of different ways. So first, let's look at donors according to their giving levels, not their net worth, but their giving levels. So most people, when they think of philanthropists, are thinking about donors in the top 1 or half of 1% of givers. That is, donors giving usually many millions of dollars per year to their charitable efforts. Obviously, that requires a lot of effort, a lot of support, and most of those donors are working with a community foundation or hiring a philanthropic advisor or may have more formal structures to support that. And those efforts can be quite time consuming and expensive, but necessary. At the other end of the spectrum, we have everyday donors, and they are all of us. We are all giving money at the grocery store and Girl Scout cookies and helping our friends with relays and races and things like that. And so, generally speaking, their needs are not hugely significant. It's more DIY, and the needs are not so significant. But when I was working at Stanford doing this research, I really found a gap in terms of supporting donors in what I call the top 2 to 10% of givers. And so, for those of you in the audience today, I encourage you to think about whether you're a development director or a financial professional or other, where your clients, your donors fall within these three segments. Donors in the top 2 to 10% are usually giving away tens of thousands of dollars per year, maybe hundreds of thousands up to about $1 million um, per year. And for some of them, they don't need support. Maybe they're just giving to their alma mater, their kids' school, a religious group. But many of them have the capacity to really and to give more or to build a strategic plan. But for the most part, they aren't served as much by the philanthropic advisor ecosystem today. And that was the gap that I saw. Because for them, the solutions that exist for the top 1% of givers are really more time consuming and more expensive than what this segment needs. And so that's where the idea for GiveTeam came from. Could I build a model of philanthropic advising that would support specifically this segment? And so we work with GiveTeam. We're a philanthropic advisory firm. We work with donors all across the country, individuals, couples who want to be more thoughtful, more purposeful with their giving. They're ramping up, looking to be more strategic. They're still going to support their kids' school and their alma mater, but there's a chance to do more and to give back. They're busy, whether they're in their 20s all the way through their 90s, and they're kind of giving in this range. And so, what I found is really they needed support around two main areas. First is developing a strategy. What do I want to fund on purpose? So, we help them build a charitable mission statement based on their values, their motivations, their family priorities. That's our first meeting with donors. And then our second meeting, about a month later, we present to them organizations to consider funding. So we're playing that matchmaking role. We're saying, based on these things you care about in your community, here are organizations doing great work. And for the most part, we're recommending local community-based nonprofits. And so to do that, we build custom regional databases all across the country of organizations so we can really quickly and thoughtfully do this matchmaking. So for any of the nonprofits out there, if you see the QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, go ahead and go there, and you can request to, number one, find out, are you already in our database? Because there's a decent chance you are, but if not, it gives you a chance to request to be added. So that's one way we want to make this type of advising accessible, and the potential to do the matchmaking as well. We also, for some donors that want it, provide a 1-year check-in where we review what the organizations have been up to that they've been funding and help them think through next steps. Before I move on to the research part of the talk, I wanted to just share with you a story about a donor that we worked with in the New Hampshire area, in your backyard. This was a couple that came to us by way of a financial advisor about 2 years ago. The husband sold his business and they put $1 million into a commercial DAF sponsor, where their financial advisor had custodianed their assets. For about 2 years, this couple thought they'd find something to fund, but it just didn't happen. They just really didn't know where to start. They didn't have a ton of existing relationships with nonprofits. They had funded a hospital once. They had once funded something related to a local high school, but they needed a plan and new organizations to get excited about. They had recently heard about a couple of nonprofits that could be a good fit. They wanted us to look into those. And at this really busy stage in their life, they were working still and they had young kids. They really just wanted to write checks and didn't have the time to be super involved. That doesn't make them bad people. It's just the reality of the situation. And so we worked with them to develop a charitable mission statement. And they wanted to focus on providing support to nonprofits that work with vulnerable people, as well as funding organizations supporting domestic pets in the New Hampshire and New England regions. We ended up providing them with 10 recommendations, all local. And within a few weeks, they actually made gifts to all 10. That sometimes happens. Normally, they'll pick, a handful of the organizations and make gifts, but within a few weeks, they moved $80,000 to those local organizations, and that was pretty close to what their goal was that year. So it's just a great example of a way to work with busy people, find a way to inspire them, and help them start moving those assets, those charitable assets, back into the community. Okay, so that's just a bit of background about how we work. But today, what we're going to do is go through. I talk about DAFs all the time, donor advised funds. I study them, I research them, and I wanted to take you through what I see as some of the big talking points, areas of interest that I'm constantly teaching about, and that I find advisors find really interesting for their work. So I'm going to take you through a couple of different parts today, and I'm going to move pretty quickly because there's a lot to get through. We'll have opportunities for questions along the way and at the end, so bear with me, but I'm going to move at a pretty quick clip. Okay, so this first area, I just want to orient everybody. You're going to be familiar with a lot of these data points, but just so we're all speaking the same language at a high level, here's the Giving USA data. 592 billion given away in 2024. What I find interesting about the pie chart is thinking about where DAFs fall into this. And so they're going to be in these pink and purple areas. So giving by individuals, DAFs will fall into that category a little bit. And then community foundation giving, where DAFs also live, are going to fit into this 19% over here. So you can see how those dollars have grown over time. And then the other thing I like to look at is the total value of contributions to DAFs. So this is dollars going into DAFs. And you can see there was a dip in 2023, but for the most part, sort of an upward trend. These are dollars into DAFs, dollars at the DAF. So these are the assets, the total assets in the DAF. You can see that growing over time. So in 2024, that's 326 billion sitting in DAFs across the country. So this is just sort of looking at some of these numbers over time. But what I think is a more interesting way to look at this growth is to compare it to the 2011 numbers. So DAFs are not new to the scene. They didn't just become popular in 2011. They've been around for many, many decades. But 2011 was sort of the beginning of the growth that we saw. And in 2011, there were 188,000 DAFs. And in 2024, 3.5 million. That's a 19-time increase. The total dollars in DAF accounts went from 37 billion to 326. That's a 9 times increase. And the grants out of DAFs, money going back into communities, grew to 64 billion, an 8.5 increase. What I find particularly interesting, and this can be shocking to some people, is that as of 2024, $1 in $4 contributed to charity is contributed to a DAF. So I'm just going to let you sit with that for a moment. So if we're not paying attention to DAFs, you're not seeing where the money's moving in the sector. So just to underscore how important it is to understand DAFs, understand how donors are using DAFs, understand the different benefits and opportunities for donors and clients. So I'm constantly reading reports, and this is from the latest DAF RC annual DAF report from 2025. So what's so fascinating about this shows the total number of DAF accounts, but the difference between the dark orange and the yellow is that the dark orange is going to show you the number of accounts in the sort of standard national sponsors, the Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, NPT kinds of DAF sponsors. And the light yellow is going to show you all of those donation processors. So those are like the Network for Goods, GoFundMe, PayPal giving funds. This is super interesting. So the biggest growth in terms of DAF accounts is really from the donation processors. And in fact, there certainly is still growth among the standard national DAFs, getting up to almost 500,000 here in 2024, but the growth is not as staggering. So I find that really interesting. However, What's important to note is when you look at the dollars in those accounts, and it's a little hard to see on the slide, but do you see how the majority of these columns is dark orange? That is because the assets in those accounts are primarily held at those national sponsors, at those standard DAF sponsors. I believe community foundations fall into that category as well. So you can see that the donation processors, while they have lots more accounts, it's really a pass through. Assets aren't being held there in the same way. So very different behavior types. So we hear about 3.3 million accounts, but in reality, in my mind, 500,000 is really more the number that is holding the assets and has the potential to move. So I just thought that was really interesting. Wanted to pull that out of that report for you. The other thing I find interesting is the trends of what the alternative was before DAFs. Before DAFs, private foundations were primarily, besides checkbook giving, of course, the main giving vehicle that people used. And it really is in 2020 that we see this split, where DAFs then start taking off and private foundations start sort of on the decline in terms of fewer people opening up private foundations and more private foundations closing and moving those assets into DAFs. If we look at the total charitable assets between private foundations and DAFs, it's also pretty interesting. So there's 1.6 trillion sitting in private foundations as of the end of 2024. So that's still a lot more than DAFs. Total grants out that year was 118 billion from private foundations versus 64 billion from DAFs. But if you look at the average payout rate, private foundations still pale in comparison to DAFs, hovering at that 8.1% versus DAFs on average around 25%. So just I find it really interesting. Private foundations have 5 times the amount of money, but really only gave away 1.8 times in grants. And there are obviously reasons for that, and we'll talk about those behaviors a little bit later. But just again, interesting to understand sort of these big trends as we're looking at the field. Let's look a little bit more closely at the specifics of who's using DAFs. So I thought this was really interesting. Baby boomers account for almost half of DAF accounts, Gen X 20%, the silent generation 18, and interestingly, millennials less than 10%. This is really noteworthy because millennials are a pretty significant segment of the population that are receiving inheritance as the older generations pass away. They also are growing in terms of their wealth. So to me, this segment represents the greatest potential for future DAF growth. So for the advisors out there, especially because millennials tend to be pretty values aligned, they often want to invest in a values aligned way, purchase products in a values aligned way, work in companies that are values aligned. This generation has the potential to really leverage DAFs more than are happening today. So think about that if you've got clients in that segment. Account sizes. So this is just looking at the number of accounts. So one study shows us that 65% of accounts have less than 100,000. And so you can see that for Fidelity Charitable, the median account balance is about 27,000. About half are under 25K, about 40% are 25 to 250K. And then the 2025 national study showed the average DAF size being 91K. So these are just a few different data points. There's not going to be exactly one answer to average DAF size across all accounts, but it just shows you that more and more individuals are using DAFs, and in many cases for smaller account balances. These are people who would not have started private foundations otherwise, but are really leveraging this as an effective charitable giving planning tool for them. If we look at the types of assets contributed, this shouldn't be too surprising. Mostly individuals are donating stock, appreciated stock, and that has a lot of tax advantages and benefits. This is a good planning strategy for a lot of advisors with their clients. Some individuals are still contributing cash, that's 31%, and some non-publicly traded assets, other types of assets. But every year I check this, and this sort of blue bar gets larger and larger as more and more people are contributing publicly traded securities. And then if we look at payout rates, this is often one of the biggest topics of conversation around donor advised funds, usually as a negative trend or a negative point. I don't view it that way. I see, this average payout according to the 2025 National Study on DAFs at about 25%. Fidelity Charitable reported that within 1 year, about 42% is going out within 5 years. Sorry about that, 5 years. 73% is out the door. And after 10 years, 89% of that initial gift has been granted out. We're going to look more closely at how donors are using donor advised funds and come back to this payout rate conversation because it's very important to understand how donors are using their accounts differently to understand the nuances of these payout rates. This is another thing that I think is pretty interesting to focus on. One of the benefits of donor advised funds for some is that they can give anonymously, fully anonymously here. So in the 2024 National Study on DAFs found that only 4%, less than 4% of all gifts were fully anonymous. Fidelity Charitable reported about 5% being fully anonymous in 2025. And 80% the donor gave their name and address. The interesting thing, though, here is that in some cases, individuals are only giving their account name. Here, that's 15%. And sometimes that might just be the blue fund or the rainbow, or like whatever it might be. And that's not very indicative of who the individual is giving those gifts. So one of the things that we work with a lot with donors is really helping them understand what happens when they make an anonymous gift and if that really is the right choice for them. As much as possible, we encourage donors to share their information so they can be appropriately thanked and stewarded from development directors. But in some cases, an anonymous gift makes sense. And so DAFs allow for that, which is a benefit. Okay, I know that was a lot, and I've got a lot more to get through. I'm just going to check in with Lisa really quickly and see if there's anything that has come up so far that we should be addressing. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next topic. That just was high level DAF trends. Lisa?
I think the questions that I have so far can wait till the end.
Okay, thank you so much. So I want to move on to, so in that first section, you saw at the bottom of each slide, I'm citing where I'm pulling this research from. There are lots of different data sources, and we'll be sure to share those resources out with you in a follow-up email. The next resource I want to talk about, and this is something that when I present this to advisors, it really is something tangible they can hold on to, and it helps them think about the donors, the clients they're working with, really how to better serve them around these behaviors. So a couple of years ago, when I was doing research at Stanford, I was interviewing donors about how they were using DAFs and ended up working and collaborating with Dan Heist and a number of other researchers, realizing we actually had the same interview protocol in the work we were doing. So we combined forces and did this much larger study and ended up publishing this paper in 2022 called Tubs, Tanks, and Towers. And this is, we really wanted to look at different archetypes. How are donors actually using their DAF accounts? And so what we found is that there really are three main behaviors, main donor types. And I want to talk you through each of these, and I would love for you to think about the clients, the donors you're working with, where they fall into these categories. I think you're going to see some of these behaviors. Think about yourself too. I'll share which type of donor my husband and I are. So the analogy here is water in a vessel. So tub donors are going to put money into their DAF, and really their goal is to give it out within that year. It's kind of a budgeting exercise. So they fill the DAF and then they pay out the DAF. I'm going to talk more about that. That's the tub donor. The tower donor makes a larger initial contribution with the idea of spending down over 2 to 10 years, let's say. So they have a slightly lower payout rate, but it's going to be over a shortish time frame. And then the tower donors are putting a really large amount in, and essentially using it like it's a private foundation. So it's really useful to understand these three behaviors because you're going to then advise your clients, your donors, in different ways. So let's look at each. So the tub donor is going to make a contribution. And usually they say to themselves, look, we give away 50K every year. So we're going to move 50K worth of appreciated stock into our DAF. And then we get that taxable benefit that year. And then we distribute those dollars. So in a lot of cases, they are moving appreciated assets like stock. They're very aware of the tax benefit. That's one of the incentives. Because they're intending to move this money in a short period of time, how those assets are invested is a little bit less important. They want that money to be available to distribute because they're using it as more like a checking account intermediary. They might be more mindful of DAF sponsor fees because they really just want to be moving this money quickly. One behavior we see is that in many cases, donors already have organizations in mind. They're used to giving to the same organizations. And oftentimes that's going to be an alma mater, a kid's school, a religious group, some big organizations you've heard of, maybe a big local food bank or something like that. These individuals don't often have a lot extra in their DAF to make a major gift. They'd have to plan for that separately. And they really do appreciate the simplified process that DAF offers. So my husband and I use our DAF like we're tub donors. We put money in and we say, this is how much we're going to distribute this year. So you might think about if you fit that model or if the donors you're working with fit that model. So that's the tub donor. The tank donors often will have some larger event, maybe an inheritance, maybe they've sold a business, maybe there's a big stock grant that they're going to be realizing that year. Maybe they are trying to take advantage of a certain tax bracket, and so their advisors having them do bunching, combining multiple years of charitable giving into 1 year with the intention of then distributing out over many years. Because a lot of these larger donations are going to be tied to major income events, the tax benefit conversation is certainly going to be part of that. Usually they're going to put more money in there than they intend to spend in a few years. But the plan is not for this to be a private foundation. So the plan is not for this to be in there forever. What's interesting about this group is it often takes them a little while to get going, but because they have this large and growing corpus, especially if they've invested those assets and the stock market is doing well, this is a great group to go to with major gift possibilities because they have more wiggle room. They have more money that they haven't already set aside. But this donors in this segment might really need help figuring out how to allocate those dollars because they might not have a plan and it might feel overwhelming to think, oh my gosh, I've got $1 million in there. How can I distribute that over the next few years? So those are the tank donors. And then the tower donors, really they're using a DAF like it's a private foundation. So usually one large lump sum, or private foundations might close their doors and move everything into the DAF. And they're really, in their minds, setting a spending goal. A lot of times it's 5 to 10%. Asset allocation is going to be really important to this segment because they want that money in many cases to be around for in perpetuity, or potentially for some much longer time frame. They're often actively grant making because maybe they've established protocols with a number of organizations, and they might make multi-year commitments because they're doing that longer term planning. Now, of course, donors can shift archetypes over time. They can sometimes be more than one. And this is we can't put everyone into one of these buckets, but hopefully this gives you a sense of how we see donors using DAFs differently. And to me, as I take a step back and think about the practical applications of this, I think about possible policy changes that might be proposed in Washington, and how, because donors aren't using DAFs all in the same way, I worry that if we apply rules to all DAFs that it could have negative consequences. So I could talk about DAFs forever and ever, and my thoughts about this. I'm going to save this for now, but if you do have questions on this, I'm happy to revisit that at the end. But this is just something that I've found really useful in understanding DAF behavior. And I even have some financial advisors I've taught this to who teach their clients about this and joke with them about, oh, you're my tub donor, you're my tower donor. And it's just a way for them to understand the best way to support those clients. So that's my summary of tubs, tanks, and towers. I hope that was useful and maybe new to some of you. Lisa, any questions right now before I move on to another research report?
So I do, a question did come through, and you can answer it now because it sort of did apply to the types of donors, or maybe at the end. But someone pointed out Congress, not so much recently, but in the past, has really been trying to certain legislators wanted to pass legislation to limit DAFs because they feel it's just that the money is not actually getting distributed. And from what you showed us, that's not true. It's not really based in the facts at all. So why is it that there are certain legislators who are so against DAFs and don't really see them as philanthropic? And is that something that we should be concerned about in the near future?
Thank you. That's a great question. So that is one of the biggest topics of conversation, and there has been so much criticism about payout rates for DAFs. And I just have to come back to the research, which shows that on average, DAFs payout rate is so much higher than private foundations, and the corpus in private foundations of assets is so much higher than that of DAFs. So I'm not opposed to regulations. I'm not opposed to encouraging more active charitable distributions. But I think it's really important to understand the data in order to make informed policy recommendations. And what my worry is if we were to say to DAF holders that just like a private foundation, you must pay out at least 5% every year, that the tub donors would say, what, I'm doing something wrong? Because my payout's like 95%. Is this not right? Should I be giving less, or am I doing something? So my worry is it's going to bring the bar down for some. Now, the reality is there are DAF accounts out there that are lying dormant. And I don't love that. I don't think that's the purpose. And giving the donor the charitable tax deduction and benefit up front, but then not incentivizing the dollars out the door, there's a mismatch there. And so my challenge is I don't think that there is one policy that will solve that problem or that will accommodate all the potential concerns. Rather, my preference is that DAF sponsors, financial advisors, philanthropic advisors take an active role in working with their clients and donors to move that money back into society. There are some reasons why people are waiting, and right now those might be legitimate reasons, but many of them, it's they're too busy, they don't know, they don't have the right advice, and I think we can solve for that just by better supporting them. And so I think I'd rather go that route than a new policy, which might actually have unintended negative consequences for more. It's not perfect, but I think it is very important to look at research and actual user behavior before making policy recommendations. And right now, when I look at the data, I see an issue with private foundations that we might want to address. And DAFs, there are certainly challenges too, but the data just doesn't support major policy changes as much, in my opinion, but that is just my opinion. Okay, thank you for that question. I'm going to move on to this next research. So this is research that is just out. It's brand new. I wonder if any of you have seen this. The American Endowment Foundation worked on this for over the last year. Their report just came out in March, called Unlocking Generosity, the Advisor's Role in Inspiring Purpose and Impact. And it is more than 100 pages. So, if you have a flight coming up, that could be a great time to dig into this. I wanted to give you my high level summary of this research and the practical takeaways that I think could be useful for you and your work. What it really does is an outstanding job of essentially looking at all research out there, like a literature review, across anything touching charitable giving and advisors' role in working with donors. They cite so much other research that's out there and really build a narrative around the importance to upskill in this area, which really is the trend that we're seeing. And so just a couple of highlights from this research that I wanted to share with you. A lot of research reports that I read talk about this disconnect, and these numbers are just incredibly revealing. And so one of the things that they looked at was today's clients want to give, but a major disconnect between the client expectation and the advisor support exists. 87% of clients say they want charitable planning advice, and 80% of advisors say they're giving it. But the reality is 6% of clients feel they actually receive it. That is an abysmally small number. So whatever's happening here is not working. Clients want it, advisors say they're giving it, but they don't feel like they're receiving it. And so we think, and what this paper argues is they think that this disconnect continues to persist because what advisors are offering isn't what clients are expecting or wanting only, because advisors often are talking about tax efficiency, vehicle selection, the structure, which assets, the how of giving, those technical pieces, which is necessary. But what's missing is the why. Why? What do I care about? Why do I want to make an impact? Those other components. And so it's not that advisors aren't talking about giving it all, but the lane that they're staying in might be too narrow given the expectation of what the clients want to be talking about with them. So that's what I want you to think about, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. So here's that chart again, just seeing sort of that 6%, which we really need to get that up. So advisors are helping clients with, well, how much can I give away? And which assets should I give? And what vehicle should I use? But what they're not as much helping clients with, and so advisors out there, let's think, are you doing any of these things? What are my values? What are my passions? How can I effectively channel that into a giving strategy? How do I find and evaluate nonprofits? How do I ensure that my contributions are having an impact in the areas I care most about? Now, the caveat I like to offer up here is I don't believe advisors necessarily have to be experts in absolutely everything else here. However, they do need to be proficient in having these more soft skills around values, priorities, impact. They don't need to become experts in nonprofit evaluation, but they need to know who is so they can connect their clients when the time is right. So whether they themselves have the in-house knowledge or they have a referral network like your local community foundations, you need to build your practice so that you can support a range of what your clients need. And so really the goal is to, of course, you need to have the tax planning approach, but you need to go beyond that and really build in the values and passions that your clients care about. This is a really cool chart that a financial advisor colleague, Noelle Brown from Morgan Stanley, shared with me. And it's in this report as well. It's her interpretation of the evolution of advice that financial advisors give from transactional to what now is really generational. And what I want to point out is, so you can see that back in the 70s and 80s, it was really financial advisors were brokers and they were doing technical insights, trading on the trading floor. And then they sort of became investment managers. And then, maybe in the 90s and 2000s, the wealth manager sort of concept developed. And then what we see now are the requirements. If you really want to be an effective planner for your clients, these are all the things that are required. It goes beyond just portfolio construction and asset allocation. But you'll see philanthropy management is part of this. Cash management, estate planning. There's wealth education, family governance, legacy, generational estate planning, values and mission integration. So what I like about this chart is it gives financial advisors a chance to say, which type of advisor am I? And is this the lane I want to be in? And if not, how do I build my practice to be able to really support multi-generations of families that I might be working with? So just the importance there of philanthropy as well. I'm going to skip this left side just in the interest of time. Let me keep going. So we also wanted to look at generational differences. So younger people expect to discuss philanthropy earlier in the planning process. I'm just going to point out this one part of this slide. So 46% of those 21 to 43-year-olds are going to be discussing philanthropy in those initial conversations before an investment plan has even been developed. And that's not typical of what I see most financial advisors. Normally they're checking off all the boxes of all the other planning pieces, and philanthropy is usually an afterthought. And for the 44 plus crowd, that's often what's happening. But just notice that younger people are expecting to talk about this earlier in the planning process. The required skill set for these advisors. So what does it take to build your proficiency around philanthropy and charitable planning? Obviously, the technical planning knowledge pieces, understanding the tax planning rules and structures, estate planning implications, really being able to facilitate conversations. These are some of the softer skills. Sometimes these are emotional conversations. And then these next few that I'm going to show, it might be that you have this skill set or you have people who you refer clients to that have this skill set. But developing values, finding nonprofits to fund. As the complexity grows, if necessary, family governance across multi-generations. And then ongoing management and coordination. For the more complex, they might really require more sophisticated, multiple giving vehicles, formal grant application processes. So again, it's not necessarily the case that you as the advisor have to be able to do all of these things, but you have to know enough about them to identify when your client needs support and whether you're going to be the one to provide it or you're going to connect them with the resource to help them achieve their goals. Couple other interesting findings. What the advisors said in this report that were some of the barriers. And the biggest was advisors didn't feel that they were a philanthropy expert, didn't have formal training. And so that's a pretty real barrier. I think we don't need advisors to all be philanthropy experts, but they do need to be better at talking about some of these values, motivations, other types of goals as well. The best way to look at it is advisors who have a scarcity mindset around charitable giving versus a value add mindset. And so the report talks about how advisors with a scarcity mindset really are worried about loss of AUM. If people are giving money away, then that's less money for them to manage. And that just means that their goal is to preserve assets. We find that advisors that have a value add mindset view charitable planning completely differently. They certainly are still billing based on AUM, but they view charitable planning as a really effective way to deepen trust with their clients, to strengthen those multi-generational ties, to differentiate their practice. They have more loyal clients, more referrals, larger growth. One of the advisors that I've been working with a few years ago shifted his practice to say, look, I'm going to squarely pick, advertise, market that I work with charitably inclined clients. This is my area of specialization. Within 1 year, his practice grew by 40%. And that growth has continued. And he just changed the way he talked about it and the way he brought value to his clients. And I see this over and over again with the advisors that bring clients to us that really understand that value. So I'm going to come back to this concept of scarcity mindset and value add mindset. I'm looking at the time. We have 16 minutes left. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm just going to touch on these really quickly and then round us out. So in this report, the report calls out 4 different types of advisors. And so I think what's useful about this for the advisors out there is to think about where you fall under these 4 and if that's where you want to be or what it would take to move along that spectrum. So they're the not engaged advisors who really feel like, you know what, philanthropy is just not my role. I talk about taxes and math, but it's just not my responsibility to focus on those pieces. Hopefully that's not you, but there are advisors out there who feel that way. And so they're really not prioritizing charitable support for their clients. Then there are the passively engaged advisors, and these advisors they really are going to bring in outside experts. They don't view that as a friend, they're as a negative, but they don't themselves necessarily have the resources or the knowledge to support. And so they could upskill a little bit more to be able to support their clients on their journey a bit better. Then there are the want to participate advisors, and these advisors are open to discussing philanthropy, but they might not have the tools or confidence. And so there are a lot of resources out there to upskill and to learn, and they recognize the value of supporting in this way, but they might just lack the framework and the knowledge. But they're hungry for it. They want to improve. And then there are the proactive advisors. And they see their role as like, I'm going to support my clients in this way. This is good for my clients. It's good for my business. I have my own process that I've developed to support clients in this way. And they really are bringing up this topic with their clients consistently over the years and not just in a reactive way. So, that is the latest research that is out there. It is chock full of so many interesting citations and other data points. I'll make sure you all get a link to that. But those were some of the main pieces that I thought were most interesting as takeaways as I think about the advisors we work with and have seen over the years. Any questions so far, Lisa, before I just round us out with a few last thoughts?
There is a question about how an advisor might bring up should they be bringing up the conversation if their clients are not? Is that appropriate to bring it up? And how would they if the clients aren't bringing it up?
Great. Thank you for that question. So, yes. So I'm actually going to hold on to that question because in 3 slides, I'm going to talk about some of the times to bring it up. So I'm going to come back to that one, Lisa. Thank you. And I'll be sure to address it. Let me just say that coming soon is is the next bit of research on donor advised funds, and it's coming out in May, so stay tuned. I just wanted to bring it to your attention because if you are at all like me and enjoy thinking about DAFs and research and practical applications, this is the next research study that's coming out. It's called Financial Planning in the Age of Donor Advised Funds. And I've had the pleasure of working with a number of researchers as part of the DAF Research Collaborative to look at really financial advisors and how and when and in what situations they're talking about DAFs with their clients. And we interviewed a number of advisors across focus groups and ran a national survey of financial advisors all across the country with all different backgrounds. And that research is coming out in May. So if you want to follow that, I recommend you find the DAF Research Collaborative on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to see when that research comes out. Because it's not out yet, I can't reveal anything about it because we're in final stages for that publication. But what I think would be useful is, as I take a step back, I wanted to offer you all an example of what I've seen over the years of best in class financial advisors. So, in my work at Stanford, in my work at GiveTeam, in my research efforts over the years, there's certain characteristics that have really emerged as best in class financial planners around the charitable giving topic. And so I just wanted to highlight those with you so you can see, and this is where I'm going to address that question, Lisa. So, one common characteristic is that advisors are bringing up the charitable planning conversation early and proactively in the planning relationship. So that means in an intake form, you have a client intake form, you're asking, hey, how much did you give to charity last year? Or is charitable planning a topic you'd like to discuss? Or to what extent are the following things important to you? And then charitable planning is one of those, and you're finding out. So you're asking proactively and early, is this something you want to talk about? You're also indicating in your meeting agenda, you're saying, look, here are the 5 things we're going to talk about today, and charitable planning is one of them. So you're letting your clients know that this is something that we do. We have expertise in this area. We can support you. And the client might say, oh, that's not relevant to me. We're not doing any charitable giving right now. And you say, okay, no problem. We'll drop it off the agenda. Or, okay, great. I'll bring it up again in a year and see if anything's changed. So it's perfectly fine to bring it up. We've found that advisors, there's never been a negative. The worst case scenario is like, no, that's not relevant to me, or I don't need that help right now. Okay, great. Moving on to the next topic. So we do recommend early and proactively, so you're in the driver's seat. And then regular touch points. So it's not like it's a one-off, but you have an annual review. Charitable planning is always one of those pieces. Has anything changed? What do we need to think about? Do you have the help and support that you need? So bringing it up often. I've also found that the advisors that tend to be most invested in supporting their clients around charitable giving are also charitably inclined. And they're serving on boards, they're volunteering, they might do an employee day where they're volunteering as an office, but they themselves are personally charitably engaged. The advisor I just shared with you, whose business just skyrocketed after he changed the way he talks about his practice, he updated his bio, he updated his website to reflect his planning focus. So he wears it on his sleeve. And again, these advisors have not had clients say, oh, I don't want to work with you because your focus is charitable giving and that's not relevant to me. That's never happened. So it's just one piece of something that an advisor can bring to the table. These advisors tend to have a DAF, so they know how it works. They have their own. They can talk about it really easily with clients. They also derive a lot of value and personal pleasure and enjoyment from helping their clients achieve their charitable objectives. They see it as a core part of their offering. And then back to that scarcity mindset. They don't have a scarcity mindset. They're not worried that by talking about it more, their AUM will dip. In fact, usually the opposite happens. More assets come over, more referrals, more loyalty, deeper engagement. So those are just a couple of what I have seen over the years as really the best in class financial advisors and how they've built their practice around that. Just a few last takeaways, and then I'll stop for questions. If I didn't get this message across, then I've failed. But DAFs are a powerful and popular giving tool for donors. We've seen that over the years. Donors use DAFs in a lot of different ways, and so I think it's important to really understand that nuance when supporting clients, when proposing new policy regulations. There still is a disconnect between what clients say they're wanting and what advisors are giving them. And so really encourage you to, for some self, introspection, really analyze your practice and see, is this happening with you and your clients as well? You might need to invest in some upskilling to support your clients or build out your network so that you have the right referral partners to help. And the advisors who engage charitably themselves tend to attract charitably minded clients, and those clients often have higher AUM. So it really can be good for your business just as it's good for your clients. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm going to end my screen sharing so that I can answer any additional questions. And I thank you so much for your time. So let me stop sharing. Lisa, what other questions do we have in these last few minutes?
Sorry. We
No problem.
We have a question here that I saw here, and now I'm having trouble finding it. So I'm going to try to correctly summarize what I remember it saying because I don't see it in the chat anymore. Which is this advisor says that they're using with their tub donors who are over 70 and a half or older, they're using QCDs, which is a great way for them to do their charitable giving at that age, very tax efficient. And is there something else that they should be doing, and how does this interact with donor advised funds or complement?
Yeah, so we see a lot of QCD giving as well. I think almost every donor I've ever talked to, the idea of a QCD came from their financial advisor. So great job, advisors. That is a very big area you can add value today. You can't you can't run the QCD through your DAF. There has been talk about potential legislation where the QCD could move into a DAF for later distribution. I actually don't think it's terrible that the QCD has to be distributed directly to charities within that year, because again, that's the whole point. We do want the money moving back to charities, but I'll often see donors leveraging multiple giving vehicles. They'll have their QCD bucket with that account, and then they'll have their DAF, and they'll have others. And so it's a great tool. If you aren't talking to your retired age clients about that, you definitely should be.
And another question, is there research available concerning what percentage of commercial donor advised fund hold donors die without a beneficiary listed for their DAF?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't have a great research citation for you on that. I just know that my colleagues at all the major national commercial DAF sponsors, they have entire offices working on that. The goal really is not to have somebody pass away and not have a beneficiary tied to that. For the most part, what happens if they don't have someone to administer the account after they've passed away? The staff at that commercial DAF sponsor will likely make distributions to whatever the organizations were they most recently funded. They want to give that money away however the donor would have wanted, but there are challenges. So that's another thing advisors can really help with, making sure that when their clients are setting up their DAF accounts, they do have other beneficiaries, if they were to pass away, who would then manage that account.
Great, thank you. And another one, what were any elements of the research that surprised you?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Well, there's so many research papers. Which research? I think the biggest statistic that I sort of latched onto was the fact that only 6% of donors felt like they were getting the advice they needed. That, to me, that's a new number. So the clients are saying they're asking for it, the advisors are saying they're giving it. That has changed over the years. But the bigger number that I think stood out to me is that clients say they want it, but only 6% feel like they're getting the support they need. That is a major disconnect. And that is a moment for advisors to really think, am I doing what my clients need? And that might be a chance at your next review or your next touch point. Ask your clients, am I providing the charitable planning support you need? What more could I be doing? That might just be a useful data point for some advisors.
Another question, is there advice on how to get major donor advised fund holders, Fidelity, Vanguard, et cetera, to highlight a particular nonprofit as potential beneficiary of a DAF owner's philanthropy? And I'm going to actually just do one response to this before Erinn addresses it in terms of the commercials. Of course, when you work with, these are commercial donor advised funds, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, and they're, very good and they're very large, but they are not local. They're not your community. And when you work with community foundations like Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, the Valley Community Foundation, and the Jewish Foundation, we want to meet with our local nonprofits. We want to let you to know what your needs are, what your impact are, because a lot of our donors are interested in hearing about local needs, local impact. So it's very important that you let us know what you're doing and what the needs are. And I'm going to turn it over to Erinn in terms of the commercial.
Yeah, so generally speaking, no. The national commercial DAFs are not going to say, hey, have you ever considered this organization? Because they really want to play a neutral role. They're not going to sort of handpick organizations. There are exceptions to that. With the new AI tools that are out there, some DAF sponsors are experimenting with a number of different ways of, oh, you funded these organizations in the past. Might these ones that are similar in geography or size be of interest to you? What I have found, though, and where I see the disconnect for this piece is every donor I have ever met goes to their DAF with a transaction in mind. They're not going there to go shopping. They're not looking for new ideas for the most part. It's like a checking account. You're there to move money or to put money in. And so to me, that's not really the moment of inspiration or new ideas or let's get in front of them. Instead, I see the advisor as playing a really important role of asking those critical questions and really figuring out if the donor is on a proactive path. Maybe they want to fund their school and their alma mater and that's it. And they've chosen that that's what they want. But many of them would like support and help and advice, but have never known how to find it. And so you can help dig a little bit deeper and try to figure out how to help them. But I don't find that donors are going shopping when they log into their DAF. And so I think that's important to understand that behavior.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erinn. I just can't get over how you actually were able to get through so much.
It's so much. I know. I'm sorry if it was overwhelming for anyone.
It is wonderful. It's very exciting. And I love all the excitement that you bring to the
Thank you.
To the topic of conversation. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And as soon as you click off, you're going to be able to receive the evaluation. And we hope that you will evaluate this session, tell us what you liked and what you want to hear more of. And then we'll also be able to send you some of Erinn's topics, not topics, but some of those links that she referred to in all the things that she has. So thank you again, and we appreciate you being here.
Thanks, everyone.